November 24th, 2012. Canary Cry Radio published this episode called Numbers, and we talked about the number 9 in this episode, but overall numbers and how it relates to the Bible and everything else. It wasn't really an episode on numerology, just more on the various links between numbers and God and creation and everything else. But in the design of the episode, there is this logo here, and this logo is of a circle with 9 points, and it has this specific pattern of these lines starting at 1, going to 1, 5, 7, 8, 4, 2, 1, and that repeating over and over again, and also 9, 3, and 6 being the 3 other points that are not touched that keep going in circles. Well, this notion here came from Vortex Mathematics, which was a TEDx talk that was done by Randy Powell, and he was basically upholding this guy's research named Marco Rodin about free energy vortex math type of deal, and they were explaining how the number 9 had this sort of potential to be used in free energy devices, which was part of their attempt to go from mathematics in this sense to a practical device that actually taps into free energy. And basically the way it works is that these numbers that are multiples of 9 always breaks back down into 9. And what I mean by that is, let's say we do 9 times 365. We get 3,285. Now if you collapse those numbers, which means 3 plus 2 plus 8 plus 5, let's try that. 3 plus 2 plus 8 plus 5 equals 36. And if we collapse those numbers, 3 and 6, obviously 3 plus 6 is 9. And we're back at 9. So 9 has this weird property where it always breaks back down to 9, no matter how many times you multiply it. And it is an interesting thing or pattern that is within creation that concerns the number 9. And obviously, this little loop here that happens with the numbers, you'd have to imagine God is responsible for. He's the one that created the universe. He is the true author of this pattern, I guess, that exists. And whether we can derive free energy technology from it or not, I don't know. I don't know what the progress is on those folks like Randy Powell and Marco Rodin. It's been several years, and I don't see any free energy devices out there publicly yet, but who knows? Maybe in the next decade they really roll that stuff out. I would imagine if they do, then it would be highly controlled and operated by the legacy New World Order system, whatever you want to call it. But in any case, that's not really what this video is about. I started with the number 9 because I think it's seeped into the church in ways that are not really wholesome, not really godly. And in fact, I think we can relate it to the scriptures in Jude where it talks about evil men creeping in unaware, and it has to do with the Enneagram or Enneagram. I don't know how to pronounce it. I've heard different ways. I'm going to say Enneagram. And I had a friend message me recently, tell me that his church was dabbling into Enneagrams and was presenting it at their services and things like that. And it's something that I've known about and I've seen around, but haven't seen too many people really try to show what the problems are with it in terms of not just its history, but its practical application. Because as far as I can tell, the Enneagram that is used within Christian circles is basically like a Christian horoscope. And it's really nothing more. It's more of like a personality thing. And I know that there are different iterations of it, and we'll go through it. But just as a couple references to the number 9 from the scriptures, first off, there were 9 generations from Adam to Noah. So there's that 9th generation and judgment. And of course, there's also redemption in that because from Noah to Abraham, it's another 9 generations. And of course, Abraham represents the beginning of the chosen people and Israel and the redemption plan becoming more specific in that time period. And of course, Abraham was 99 years old when he received the covenant from God with his new name. And in the New Testament, if you go to the book of Matthew, chapter 27, down in verse 45 and 46, It says, from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lima sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? So that happened on the 9th hour. And of course, I think in the New Testament, there's a lot of reclaiming going on here, because you have St. Paul talking about the 9 spiritual gifts of God, which are wisdom, knowledge, faith, gift of healing, to operate miracles, prophecy, discreteness of spirit, tongues, and to interpret them. But more specifically, Paul's list of the fruit of the Spirit, which are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, truthfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that is certainly 9 things that he mentions of the fruit of the Spirit. So again, there's some kind of reclaiming that takes place and pointing it back, I think, to God the Creator, who is really responsible for this number, which obviously has these interesting properties. But as we will see, the Enneagram, which has these 9 personality levels, and we'll get into the different ways that has become a thing in history, has attached to it a very esoteric and mystical side of it that I think needs to be discussed, so that at least you know that there is this other side to the story of the Enneagram and having it become very popular in the Christian church right now. So I'm going to use this Robert Todd Carroll Skeptics Dictionary article to outline some of the things that I've noticed about the Enneagram, and we'll branch off of it because obviously I'm not an entire skeptic, but I think this article does a really good job of at least summarizing the developments of this phenomenon of Enneagrams. I'm not going to read the whole thing here, but I do have some highlights that I think will help us in this conversation. An Enneagram is literally a drawing with 9 lines. Figuratively, however, the Enneagram is a New Age mandala, a mystical gateway to personality typing. And it gets into some of the ways the numbers break down and the sequence of the numbers. And it says here, the Enneagram represents 9 personality types. How the types are defined depends on whom you ask. Some define them by the fundamental weakness or sin. Others define them by a fundamental energy that drives one's entire being. Some follow classical biorhythm theory and classify the 9 types according to 3 types of types: mental, emotional, and physical. Others classify the 9 types according to 3 types of instinctual drives: the self-preservation drive, the social drives, and the sexual drives. Some follow Gurdjieff, I think, Gurdjief, Gurdjieff, who claims to have followed Sufism and type the types as mental, emotional, and instinctual. The one who seems to be the father of the Enneagram, Oscar Ichazo, spoke of enneagons, 9 pointed figures enclosed in a circle with a straight line connecting, or with straight lines connecting each point to others, and ego fixations corresponding to each of the 9 points. And it gets into some of the details here that I wanted to point out, and it's not necessarily highlighted on here, but I do think it's interesting and needs to be mentioned. Several sources claim that Ichazo learned of the Enneagram through Ouspensky's writing of Gurdjieff, but Ichazo denies this, and we'll get into this a little bit more down here. It talks about Ichazo. In short, he developed a typology of ego fixations based on the classical Christian notion of the 7 capital vices, 7 deadly sins, plus fear and deceit. So just adding fear and deceit to the mix. And here's what I wanted to highlight here, all right? Just to kind of get an idea of who these people, what kind of people were taking this information in and saying positive things about it, and what has just been spoken about publicly about this man, Ichazo, who brought Enneagrams, at least in the contemporary sense, to the church by relating it to the Christian notions of the 7 capital vices. And I've read in other places, we'll get into maybe another article that I have in one of the tabs here that mentions how those 7 vices came out of an original practice of some kind of Enneagrammic thing that the early monks of the church allegedly used, but we'll touch on that maybe a little bit later. But let me continue on here, because it says Ichazo was called the continuation of Gurdjieff by filmmaker Alexandro Jodorowsky, who made El Topo and The Holy Mountain, who claims to have spent a weekend expanding his consciousness with Ichazo and LSD, according to Jay Babcock. It is believed by some teachers of the Enneagram that Gurdjieff learned the Enneagram from Sufi masters, and that he was trained in the mystical arts not only of Sufism, but of the Kabbalah and Zen. And then it says he is said to have studied martial arts, yoga, Buddhism, Confucianism, the I Ching, and alchemy. All right, so the thing I wanted to highlight here, Alexandro Jodorowsky, The Holy Mountain. Have you guys ever seen pictures or footage okay, don't go watch The Holy Mountain, the movie. Okay, it is a horrible, horrible movie. Now look at this. This is Bing in the images section, The Holy Mountain, and I have it on strict mode, the safe mode. It's on strict mode, okay? Look at the images from the film. You have the Enneagram right here. Let's take a look at this one. Right there in the hat, mountain thing there. And okay, yeah, I'm not going to really get into it. That's a lady that is a bear. and again, this is in the safe mode. You have all these esoteric images. Clearly, you can see that what this film represents. And I'm just going to scroll through a few more of these here just so you get an idea of what's going on here. People burning in the all-seeing eye strict mode. Bing, thank you, Bing. And I mean, it doesn't get any more occultic or esoteric than this. Straight up. So anyway, that's the guy that said Ichazo was the continuation of Gurdjieff. Just really high praise of Ichazo, the guy who brought the Enneagram and Christianity together in the West in the 70s. So let me keep going here. Sam Keen, 1973, claims that Ichazo told him he began teaching the Enneagram after spending a week in a divine coma. A divine coma. Ichazo denies this. Ichazo claims that he has a scientific basis for his theory of personality types, ego fixations, etc. He denies that his notions were based on visions and insights taken from numerous eclectic sources and freely mixed into an amalgamum of mystical psychobabble. The National Catholic Reporter, however, claimed that, quote, Ichazo claimed to have discovered the personality type meaning of the Enneagram while in some kind of ecstatic state or trance under the influence of some spirit or angelic being, the Archangel Gabriel, the Green Kutub, a Sufi spiritual master, or Metatron, the Prince of the Archangels, which is partly why I think the Book of Enoch, the latter half of it, gets really corrupt, because basically Enoch turns into Metatron. Ichazo denies this and says, and this is again Ichazo rebutting this notion, I did not receive this material from any archangel or entity whatsoever. It was the fruit of a long, careful, and dedicated study of the human psyche and the main problems of philosophy and theology. So he thought there were problems with philosophy and theology. After working years with the Enneagrams, I could visualize them in the same form that is observed in tantric visualizations. Anybody find that ironic? That he's like, no, this is completely based on a long, dedicated study where I can basically get into a tantric visualization state. I don't know. It's just self-defeating if you ask me. But anyway, these tantric visualizations that become more vivid and clear than anything that we can perceive with our ordinary senses. Yeah, but very scientific and dedicated, but things that we can tap into that are beyond our senses, according to Ichazo here. But when I say that I saw the entire system of Enneagrams like in a vision, it was a reference to this clarity of thought with which I can envision the entire system after so many years of dedicated, intense work. This is what I wanted to convey in my article that reads, and he quotes his own article here that people are questioning, okay? Quote, they came to me, 108 in all, as in a vision, showing their internal relations with complete clarity in 1954 in Santiago, Chile. Not only am I the holder of the beginning of this tradition, but also, as can be absolutely and concretely proven, the 108 Enneagrams and the entire system in all its terms have been developed by me, only and exclusively, and I am more than ready to contest it publicly. All right, so, I think this is really telling because if any of you have studied the New Age from a biblical perspective, one of the tendencies or characteristics that a lot of these New Age gurus get when they have some kind of download or some kind of vision or some kind of information that they come into, they often say that they are chosen, that they are exclusive with this knowledge, that they are the ones that receive this knowledge and are the ones that are going to distribute and externalize this knowledge to the masses. And they make themselves out to be these kinds of gods among men. And so I find it very fascinating that he has this pride associated with this thing about the Enneagrams, which clearly the Enneagram itself, if you look it up, and we'll get into some more of it later here, goes back further. It goes before 1954, where when he had this vision, this thing called the Enneagram and the personality types and stuff, it existed as a form of practice or a form of some kind of again, a mystical practice. But in any case, again, let me just pause here and just say, this is the thing that modern churches here, the Christian churches, this is what they're bringing in and saying like, hey, let's do this personality test, which, by the way, if you go to the Enneagram Institute, they have this entire thing that tells you what it is and how it's done and all that kind of thing. It's really detailed. It's very scientific because obviously it's got this psychological or psychology bent to it. But here's what's really funny. I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe I'll take a test and see what it is, see what it's like. But apparently you need to pay to take a test, at least with these guys, with the Institute. So, hey, it's a good money-making scheme, if anything else. Like Gurdjieff, or perhaps not like Gurdjieff, he claimed we are born with an essence, nature, which conflicts with our personality, nurture, and we must struggle to harmonize the two and return to our true essence. Yeah, I don't know where that is even in the Bible. I mean, it's... Okay, anyway, several former disciples have modified Ichazo's teachings during the past 20 years. Ichazo's view is that the others have not given him due credit and have engaged in a smear campaign to make him appear to be kind of a crazy mystic. I think he brought it upon himself when he basically claimed to be the only person to channel this information or whatever it is. Claudio Naranjo attended Ichazo's lectures on Ennead personality types in Santiago, Chile in the 1970s and published a book called Ennead Types in Psychotherapy in 1995. A Jesuit priest named Bob Ox got the Enneagram from Naranjo and taught courses on Enneagrams at Loyola University in Chicago in 1971. So there it is, into the institutions through the Jesuits, which is not surprising. Naranjo also taught Helen Palmer, who claims to be carrying on the esoteric oral tradition in her writings. By the time the Enneagram got to Palmer, it was embedded in Western psychological notions. Nevertheless, it remained a set of teachings without any scientific foundation. And it goes on here to talk about Helen Palmer and how Arica sued Palmer. There's all these people trying to really take over the identity of the Enneagram and who was in charge or who got it first. And the rest of it here is kind of like a little breakdown of it, which I won't get into from this skeptic.com article, which is, again, very helpful in sort of providing a roadmap for what took place. But it has seeped into Western Christianity in the churches, and this article here from religionnews.com had something really interesting to say. This is from October of 2016, so this has been ongoing for a few years. Are you my type? The Enneagram catches on with Christians. And in this article, I found a very interesting line. It says here, it's not a pickup line, at least it wasn't at the pre-conference portion of an event called Why Christian, which was back this past weekend for its second year at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago. No, this inquiry is actually just a standard part of the Enneagram, an ancient personality typing system that recently has exploded in popularity in Christian circles. Ian Morgan Cron, who co-led the Enneagram conference on Thursday with Suzanne Stabile, I think that's how you say it, Stabile, called it, quote, disruptive spiritual technology, end quote. Let me repeat that. Disruptive spiritual technology. Why in the world are we introducing disruptive spiritual technology in the church? I leave it open-ended. Leave your comments. And it goes on here, but it may not be as modern as it sounds or as alien to the faith as some might fear. In fact, some trace the Enneagram to a 4th century Christian monk and ascetic named Evagrius, whose teaching later influenced the formation of the 7 deadly sins, according to Cron and Stabile. Stabile? I don't know. Others detect elements of the Enneagram within Sufism and Judaism. The Enneagram came to the United States in the 1970s, where it initially caught on among Catholic seminaries and priests and became a tool for spiritual formation. In its present form, the Enneagram includes 9 personality types or numbers illustrated by a 9-pointed geometric figure. And let's take a look at this Evagrius character. Evagrius Ponticus, also called Evagrius of Solitary, was a Christian monk and ascetic, was one of the most influential theologians in the 4th century church. He was well known as a thinker, polished speaker, and gifted writer. He left a promising ecclesiastical career in Constantinople and traveled to Jerusalem, where in 383 he became a monk at a monastery of Rufinus and Melania the Elder. He then went to Egypt and spent the remaining years of his life in Nitria and Kelia, marked by years of asceticism and writing. So there you go. Let's see if we can find anything about the Enneagram. Well, nothing on this wiki page mentions the Enneagram. I don't know exactly what the reference is that was made by those two people pushing this conference. So just to get a little bit more of where these folks were getting their information, why they think that the Enneagram goes back much further, we have this article here, Enneagram Monthly, Pythagoras, Gurdjieff, and the Enneagram. And in the article here, it says that in Evagrius's writing are found both an Enneagram-like symbolism and the 8 evil thoughts, which were later to become the 7 deadly sins of Christianity. Evagrius lived in a historic period when a rich commonling of Christian, Hellenistic, pre-Islamic, and probably also Hindu and Buddhist influences was occurring in the Middle East. This raises many interesting issues concerning the history and original meaning of the Enneagram. What is the meaning of Evagrius's number symbolism? Were the fixations wedded to the Enneagram as early as the 4th century AD? Was Gurdjieff influenced by the early Christian teachings of Evagrius Ponticus and the Desert Fathers? Before the dawn of the modern scientific and problematic way of thinking, there were different ways of explaining the world, ways that seemed contrived, arbitrary, and even superstitious. And goes into Pythagoras here, and below is the writing of Evagrius Ponticus, in which he uses Pythagorean number theory and describes an Enneagram-like figure. This text is part of a letter written as an introduction to chapters on prayer, a guide to contemplative practice from the Philokalia, translated from the Greek by G. Palmer, and so on. So it says here, quote, this is Evagrius Ponticus talking about Pythagorean number theory. And I'll tell you where the number 9 comes in here. Quote, I have divided this discourse on prayer into 153 texts. 153. Add those together, 153, you get 9. In this way, I send you an evangelical feast so that you may delight in a symbolical number that combines a triangular with a hexagonal figure. The triangle indicates spiritual knowledge of the Trinity. The hexagon indicates the ordered creation of the world in 6 days. The number 100 is square, and the number 53 is triangular and spherical. For 28 is triangular, and 25 is spherical, 5 times 5 being 25. In this way, you have a square figure to express the fourfold nature of the virtues in a spherical number, 25, which by form represents the cyclic movement of time and so indicates true knowledge of this present age. For week follows week, and month follows month, and time revolves from year to year, and season follows season, as we see from the movement of the sun and moon, of spring and summer, and so on. The triangle can signify knowledge of the Holy Trinity, or you can regard the total sum, 153, as triangular, and so signifying respectively the practice of the virtues, contemplation of the divine in nature, and theology or spiritual knowledge of God. Faith, hope, and love, or gold, silver, and precious stones. So much then for this number. So they try to explain it here where they have a connection to Gurdjieff, because if they can connect it to Gurdjieff, then obviously this whole system began much earlier and is actually Christian, is what, I guess some of the progressive Christians can say here. But here's what it says, an explanation of the two little figures that he was talking about there. The number 153, therefore, possesses both a Trinitarian quality, symbolic of the Trinity, and a 6-term quality, symbolic of the creation. This symbolization is very close to Gurdjieff's Enneagram, which expresses the law of 3 and the law of 7. A graphic representation of this number would include, and it shows the little structures there. And it gets into further detailed explanations of the various elements in that long, big quote there. And but I don't see it as necessarily, it could be maybe an origin, maybe that Gurdjieff guy was sort of influenced by this type of thing, but it really, I don't see the benefit of it because, number one, it kind of borders on works-based salvation. Like, hey, you got to do these things to become better. And maybe in terms of personality, in terms of certain levels of social interactions and things like that, maybe it can help you. But in terms of an actual spiritual salvific significance, this is actually completely moot. It is completely irrelevant to the resurrection of Jesus Christ in terms of its salvific power. So keep that in mind because, again, some people can use it as, oh, I'm just using it as a tool to, do this. Well, the associations are not very strong to any kind of true biblical notion, but it does seem to go back to certain early church fathers and things that have talked about these things or at least referenced them. And maybe there are some things that can be drawn that are of quality for one's prayer life and one's spiritual life. But let me get to the conclusion here. It says in the 4th century writing of Evagrius Ponticus, we find a highly developed contemplative psychology, which has become all but extinct in the West. We also find a Pythagorean interpretation of an important biblical symbolic number. Fragments of both the psychology and symbolism are found in the teaching of Gurdjieff and Opensky. As these ideas were part of the Hellenistic warp of the fabric of Christian and Islamic religions, we find striking similarities between early Christian thought and the later Sufi spirituality and cosmology. In our search for ancient wisdom, it is important to keep in mind our natural tendency to reinterpret what we find through our own preconceptions according to our own cultural and historical context. In this way, symbols of other cultures and contexts become invested with our own meaning, and in the process become a mirror which reflects our own contemporary interests. The writings of Evagrius and the Desert Fathers, now 1600 years old, are an inspiration to seekers in a technologically bright but spiritually dark age to open our hearts and minds to the greater possibilities that lie in each of us. So, again, a little bit more of a balanced conclusion than I was thinking in terms of a Enneagram monthly article, but at the same time, it's clear here that they think of this as spiritual technology. One of the people that really brought the Enneagram into the Western Christianity here is a guy named Richard Rohr, I think. Rohr? I don't know how to pronounce it. I think he's a Jesuit, but let's see what he says here in these clips.
Most Christians were never told that when you believe in Jesus Christ, you believe in two different things, right? Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. The Christ has existed since God decided to materialize 14.6 billion years ago. The Christ mystery is the mystery of matter and spirit coming together. That's the Big Bang. That's the birth of the Christ.
What? So the Big Bang, 14 billion years old, but two things, okay.
And I try to show you this is good theology. This is not heresy, but just most Christians were never taught that. But it's going to be very important to understand that the Christ mystery is coterminous with the universe itself. Right? That's why we speak of the cosmic Christ.
Ah, the cosmic Christ. Worship the creator, not the creation. But he is saying, Richard Rohr, in this little exposed video that someone put together in 2015, who is it by? Phil Berean. Thank you, Phil Berean, for putting this little video together. According to Richard Rohr, creation and the creator is one and the same. So this obviously brings up a huge problem with basic biblical theology, that there is a God, a creator, and then there's creation. And we are not to worship creation, but worship the creator. And so his whole little dualistic thing here of what he's talking about, again, this is the guy that's bringing in Enneagrams into your churches.
The doctrine of theosis, one of the phrases they use most often is from the second letter of Peter, the first chapter. He says, "Do you not know you are sharers in the divine nature?" Now that's where it was put most directly. Once you get it, you can see that it's intimated, it's hoped for, it's half believed and longed for, all throughout the scriptures. But it's almost too daring to believe it. You understand? It was called hubris or pride. We instead, with our dualistic minds, reminded humanity of its humanity and Jesus of his divinity. That's what the dualistic mind did to Western Christianity. So what's happening now, as we're reappreciating the mystical tradition, our inherent identity in God, the new seeing that proceeds from this inherent identity toward practices whereby you can experience your true state for yourself.
Okay, so he's basically going through here, and there's some commentary down here on the bottom of the video, but he's talking about the identity, the true identity, and how the Western tradition or Western scholarship has created this dualistic thinking. And I've heard this before, obviously, the duality of everything. And actually, this is something that is taught even in Kabbalah, the duality of matter and spirit and everything else. But this notion that our true identity, our true self, is somehow equal with God is where he goes wrong here. This is where you have basically a lot of people that have come out, even Catholics that have come out and said he's basically a heretic. And he seems like he's trying to come from a genuine place and have this sort of contrarian view of everything and trying to suggest that it's more related to the true interpretive or maybe true cultural interpretations of the time it was being read. But it really does harken back to the serpent in the garden, ye shall be as gods. And to deny that we are in that state, in that fallen state of the knowledge of good and evil, is pretty blasphemous, because now he is suggesting that as men, as human beings, as fallen human beings, that we are equal with God currently. And that is just not true. And of course, when we talk about being co-heirs with Christ, that Paul talks about in Romans 8:17, it doesn't mean that we become God ourselves. No, that's not what it's talking about. It's actually to receive, by grace and by mercy, a right to sonship. And it's important to point out we are co-heirs with Christ, Christ the God-man, right? Not co-heirs with God the Father, not co-heirs with God the Creator. We get to experience our true state, how we were created, through God becoming flesh. And that is a very specific path. It's not so much that we get to become the creator of everything. And I think that's where you lose sight of the monotheistic orthodox view of things and go into a more pagan pantheistic view. And these are fundamental differences that cannot be compromised if you're going to remain and call yourself Christian. And so, again, an example here of a spiritual leader who happens to associate with the Jesuits or is a Jesuit himself, and he is pushing out a spiritual technology to the church that is associated with people that did LSD and created creepy movies about a holy mountain. And the sentiment I'm sharing here is not really unique, okay? It says here in this AquinasandMore.com article, why we don't and won't ever carry Richard Rohr. And this is a Catholic website here, but I just think it's interesting how they are pretty blunt about why they don't carry Richard Rohr's material. It says here that one such author that they don't carry is Richard Rohr. He is a staple for St. Anthony Messenger Press and gives retreats across the country. I'll be blunt. Rohr's ideas about salvation are heretical. He just published a new book, Why Be Catholic?, which I spent some time looking through. I may have missed it, but amid all the talk about the need for community and the church's position on social justice, I couldn't find anything about truth or salvation. So even these Catholics recognize that this guy is bad news. And let me just share with you some other elements of the nine and how the nine have been corrupted and how I think this is actually being presented through the fallen ones. So here we have the occult number 9 has many different references. You have the ancient Greek pagans who held 9 as a sacred number because 9 symbolized the 9 muses or sister goddesses, daughters of Zeus. who were believed to preside over mankind's activities on Earth. And they have their names here: Calliope, Clio, Erato, Euterpe, Melpomene, Polyhymnia, Terpsichore, Thalia, and Urania. And in 1969, the Satanic Bible, published by Anton LaVey, had a section titled The 9 Satanic Statements, because obviously 9 is this really cool number that we should use. But I want to also mention, and I've mentioned this in prior videos before, the Council of 9. And in this article here at 14times.com, they outlined the story of the Council of 9 of a guy named Andrea Puharich, who was also known as Henry K. Puharich, who in 1948 researched the paranormal and started suggesting that he was in contact with the ancient entities, the Council of 9. And so it says here that known as the 9, its disciples included cutting-edge scientists, multimillionaire industrialists, and leading politicians. And it continues on, but unlike all other channeling cults, that of the 9 had serious clout. Perhaps the reason for this is that they claimed to be the Ennead, or the 9 major gods of ancient Egypt. And in December 1952, Puharich brought into his lab an Indian mystic named Dr. D.G. Vinod, who began to channel the 9 or the 9 principles. In the months before Vinod returned to India, the group met regularly to hear the 9's channeling wisdom. Never known for their modesty, the 9 proclaimed themselves to be God, stating God is nobody else than we together, the 9 principles of God. And here's again where this connects to the ideas presented by Richard Rohr, because again, he is stating that there's no difference between creation and the creator, that our true state is in this sort of God state. And this is no different. These 9 principal deities of the ancients claiming that together as 9, we are one, we are God. And of course, Puharich later on gets in contact with Uri Geller in 1971. In their first meeting in Tel Aviv in 1971, Puharich hypnotized Geller in an attempt to find out where his abilities came from. As a result, the young Israeli started to channel Spectra, an entity which claimed to be a conscious supercomputer aboard a spaceship. However, Puharich suggested to him that there might be a connection with the 9 principles, and Spectra readily agreed that there was. The 9 claimed that they had programmed Geller with his powers as a young child. Through Geller, the 9 alerted Puharich to his life's mission, which was to use Geller's talents to alert the world to an imminent mass landing of spaceships that would bring representatives of the 9. And it goes on. And one of the people that were influenced by this 9 is Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek. And that's why you have, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You have 9 main characters in the show. And actually, I think he even modeled the characters after each of the deities and their personalities. So again, this is very much in culture, but it comes from this weird, rooted, new age, channeled spirituality thing. And it's even being mentioned and suggested to be spiritual technology. So I again ask the question, why is it in our churches? And the Ennead, according to touregypt.net, were 9 great Osirian gods: Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. The term is also used to describe the great council of the gods, as well as a collective term for all the gods. Atum was the first who created himself, or arose out of Nu, the primordial or primal nothingness, and who created Shu and Tefnut from either of his spittle or his blood. From their union came Geb and Nut. Their children, the great-grandchildren of Atum, were the first gods of earth: Osiris and Iris, and Set and Nephthys. From those 4 were all the pharaohs, and many of the gods descended. And this connects back to the story of the Nephilim in Genesis 6. So we clearly know who the origin of these entities are. Now, I want to make reference here to Luke 17 because I found something really interesting. In Luke 17, 10 lepers are healed by Jesus. And let me read for you from verse 14, where it says, "When Jesus saw them, he said, 'Go, show yourselves to the priests.' And as they were on their way, they were cleansed. the lepers were. When one of them saw that he was healed, he came back, praising God in a loud voice. He fell face down at Jesus' feet in thanksgiving to him, and he was a Samaritan. Verse 17, were not all 10 cleansed? Jesus asked. Where are the other 9? Was no one found except this foreigner to return and give glory to God? Then Jesus said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. Now I want to point this out because it's interesting how God heals all 10 lepers, but 9 of them turn away and don't acknowledge him or thank him for actually healing them. And I'm wondering if there's some kind of lesson to be learned here about the Enneagram, or at least the 9 deities as associated with the gods of Egypt, because maybe there's something here that Jesus is doing to show to us that there are those who are healed, those who were given a special privilege by God, by Jesus himself, who do not acknowledge the true reason for their healing. And I'm not saying that Jesus is referencing the 9 here per se, but I just thought there was an interesting lesson to be learned from this little section here about the lepers being healed and 9 of the 10 not acknowledging that fact. There's also 9 bulls that get sacrificed that have to be without blemish, which is the same word that was used of Noah being without blemish in the sight of those who had corrupted their flesh before the flood. And just as a last-ditch thing about 9 here, this is a 9-pointed star. It's called the nonagram, and it has been called, according to the mathworld.wolfram.com, it was known as the Star of Goliath by analogy with the Star of David. Interesting. So the Star of David had 6 sides to it, and the Star of Goliath has 9. Interesting pattern again, touching back to the Nephilim, which seems to be a pattern here. Going back to the Ennead, I think you guys understand what the origin of this practice is. It's really, again, I said it at the beginning, and I remain consistent with this, is that the Enneagram really is kind of a Christian horoscope, or at least the way the Christians are using it, it's kind of a horoscope. It's a way to test your personality and find ways to analyze yourself and become a better believer, but really it has nothing to do with your salvation. Nothing. It's not going to help you be saved. It's not going to help you be a better Christian or anything like that. It's just another one of these things, these tools are used that's being sold as spiritual technology, folks. Not something that we need, because ultimately, as people familiar with this channel will know, all technology is spiritual. We are in a spiritual war. It never stops, and that's why we need the full armor of God on us. I pray you guys have an awesome day. Hopefully this reaches out to people that need to hear it, that they can maybe challenge their pastors with, maybe share it with your pastors. There's a lot more to be said about this topic. I know I'm coming at this very quickly in a very brief type of video here, but I'm sure an entire book can be written about this topic and how it has infiltrated the church and how it is deceiving those people into thinking that they're being better Christians by following the Enneagram. So again, thank you guys for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Check out the Patreon if you want to support. Check out the Teespring store. You can support that way as well. I'm also on BitChute. All links are below in the description section. Have an awesome day. God bless.